Hey everybody, I am Megan Rohrer and I am so excited. This is our first episode of a new podcast live stream video opportunity called Church History That Liberates, with the goal of trying to provide you with some stories of radical people from radical times that might inspire you to remember that you're not alone, or to have something to say when someone says, yeah, but they didn't do that in ye olde Christian times. And you could say, hey, what about this? So let's have a talk about that. And guess who's with me? Guest, will
Who?
you introduce yourself?
I am Susan Strouse. I'm the pastor at the Lutheran Church of Good Shepherd in Burlingame, California.
And it's so good to see you again.
Good to see you too.
All right. So here's how it's going to work. I have brought forward a ye olde moment from history. Susan doesn't know what this is, but then we're going to talk about it afterwards. So here's our first subject today. Israel is a place of remembering sacred places, of prayer, and of remembering sacred stories. I'll take you to a few. Join me. Today's stop, the Tomb of the Virgin in Jerusalem. The entrance way is down a long set of stairs into the deep earth. On the ceiling are mandorlas, or the shape of an almond seed or womb. When I stopped by, there was worship service happening. Notice the size of this door compared to the gentleman inside. The entryway to the Virgin's tomb is small and thin. It's supposed to remind you of a womb. The tomb down low, so you have to get on your hands and knees to view it like a toddler. The way out, also thin and narrow, so your shoulders rub against the side like you are being born into the world. First into the space behind the altar where sacred items are, where prayers are stored and hopes are traveled throughout the space. In the opening designed to remind you of the life-giving sacredness, you will find beautiful icon paintings and this very long stairway up. The womb tomb design, like this one in the Virgin's tomb, is designed to give you the feeling that you are literally being born again into the world. As you walk up and see the sunlight and it changes your eyes and dilates them, you feel blind, like you are being born into a mysterious new world. So I played a video for Susan that you can watch at virtualgrace.org if you'd like to go there, or on my YouTube page. And it shows a tour of going into the Tomb of the Virgin in Jerusalem. It's across the street from Gethsemane for those who have traveled around the space. And so there is a theory from different academics that wonders if the reason Jesus is buried in a cave instead of under the ground like rabbis who might have been of the Essene persuasion, like Jesus was, is because Jesus was a mystic or someone who was gender variant, and is buried in a cave so that it can remind people of the womb. And this idea of being born again that happens all throughout Scripture would have happened when Jesus resurrects. And remember, those linen cloths are left behind when he comes out of the cave. So he comes out of the cave naked, like people are born into the world. So born into this new life that happens after Jesus's death. What do you think about womb tombs, Susan?
Oh, well, this is a wonderful thing. I'm absolutely delighted by. But my first question is this information that you're given when you go to see this? They actually say that.
Absolutely not. It is a space that currently, the worship service, for those who couldn't see the pictures, is run entirely by men.
Uh-huh.
There were people, women who had their hair covered, of course, because they were Orthodox, of different varieties of Orthodox worshiping in the space, but entirely male run liturgy in a space designed to remind us of a womb.
So where does so I mean it's so obvious when you see the pictures and as you're describing it, I mean it's just so obvious. The imagery is all there. So when did this idea or this way of looking at begin to become known, and by whom?
So in kind of the ancient church, a lot of people believe that Jesus was in an in-between space, in an in-between space between life and death, was like the connector. So if you're a part of a faith who believes that everything is and or, like Lutherans believes, like it's death and life, it's sin and saintly, they believe that Jesus was the and that connected things. So anything where there's a dichotomy, Jesus was in that middle space between it, kind of navigating both sides. The way they demonstrated this is like, was Jesus didn't have a beard, for example, until around the year 350. So the 300s is when ideas change. Jesus becomes more manly. All the stuff about women sort of decreases. And a lot of that has to do with Roman culture, right? Constantine and his mama really like Christianity. And so they see the orientation of the world in a different way. And so some of the stuff that was more mystical or more on the fringes kind of decreases. And so you see the understandings of Jesus being in these in-between spaces, this idea of womb celebration. You see it in early Christianity, so like 500s and less, and you see it in the medieval church until the plague happens and they all become afraid of their bodies. And you start to see it coming back a little bit now as people are thinking about church in new embodied ways. So it was popular, though not everyone believed it. And it pops up in certain moments in time.
Yeah, and I was thinking about the paintings and frescoes that I've seen pictures of where they've been painted, the women have been painted over. So women who are in postures of prayer or leadership have been painted over. But then when you start to strip that off and you see that what originally was in the beginning of the church was a whole different thing than what it really became, and that now we seem to be recovering a lot of that. We're reading this book in our book group at church now. Never remember the title, but it's Jesus, Between Jesus and Christianity. The early, and we think that the church sort of just sprang up full formed with bishops and pastors and altar guild societies and coffee hours and flower chart lists and all that stuff that we think churches and pews. But it wasn't like that at all. And even in this gender, the subject of gender, and moving the diversity and the fluidity, and I think that it makes perfect sense. Even thinking about, I love what you said about Jesus being sort of in that middle, the connector, the and I it's funny because I changed the name of my blog. I used to have a blog called Proud Member of the Religious Left, and I changed it to living into that we got to get away from this either or, binary stuff, and start thinking about the and what are the connectors. And to think of Jesus as being a connector just makes such great sense. And even, I mean, just going into when people ask questions, well, was Jesus God? Was Jesus God? Or, that whole kind of thing. But I mean, that just opens up that whole way of thinking that, yeah, okay, Jesus was God and human, but not in the way that we've thought about it in the past, like being of one substance with the Father, by whom all that kind of stuff. That doesn't make sense anymore, right? That was old philosophy, old science. We've got new ways of thinking today. So what does it mean today to say both divine and human? Well, and maybe that's a possibility for all of us when we start thinking about that. But Jesus, of course, would have been the par excellence, right, example of it. But that's, to me, that's much more interesting and faith inspiring than, very God of very God, true God, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, all those really,
Begotten, not made. What does that even mean? Who knows?
all those good creeds,
Ask
right? And in
Aristotle.
the,
Ask
in the
Heraclitus.
early church, they fought, right? They weren't sure
Mhm.
what everything meant. There are lots of times in scripture where it says, and then Jesus was so annoyed he didn't even want to explain it to them, right?
Right.
And so, or
I can.
alone in private to these 12, he explained what the mysteries of the parable meant. And so,
Right. Right. Right.
like in this tour, I talked about the word mandorla. Uh, Mandorla, for those who are listening, is a shape that was heavily argued about in ancient Christianity.
Mhm.
It looks like this, but the men argued it was a seed, an almond shape, and because guess who has seeds, right? So
Mhm.
men argued that it was a seed, and all
Mhm.
of the female-bodied people were like, "You guys, it's
Yeah.
clearly a womb." And I'm substituting womb for the other words that they actually use, just because it feels a little more like if my grandma watches this, we could have a conversation about a womb. But but you see in all of these ancient paintings that same mandorla shape, that womb or seed shape, and you see it made out of a cave, the entryway of a cave. And so start
Mhm.
looking when you notice art, especially older art in museums, look for that shape and ponder what it means. What is being birthed into the world according to the idea of that painter? Because it really
Right.
is this idea of being birthed.
Yeah.
Um, and the other thing that I would say is that this idea that men might not notice the womb or might
Yeah.
notice themselves in it and the women notice themselves in it, that's not the worst ever. Like, we live in a time where people might say, oh, you just want it to mean that you're loved and welcomed and named and claimed. But that's been how people talk about faith forever. And since the very days that Jesus was wandering around, people were trying to make meaning for their own life and using the
We've
symbol.
talked about born again. We've used that language, but forgotten. And really, I mean, both men and women and anybody who identifies as whatever gets to go through the womb. I mean, I guess unless you're a test tube baby, but most of us are going to come through the birth canal, right? Or at least we're going to be in the womb. Maybe you're not going to come through the birth canal, but we're going to be in the womb. So it's a human experience. It's not just a woman thing, although that's okay too. But again, I always go back to my Valerie Carr quote that I love so much. She's a Sikh activist who's fabulous. Her TED talk is just brilliant. But when she was giving birth, she really started thinking about all these kinds of things and about all the troubles in the world and how we're all just sort of knee deep or head deep in all of this difficult stuff. And she says, what if this darkness is not the darkness of the tomb, but the darkness of the womb? What if our America is not dead, but a country that is waiting to be born? And you could substitute anything America. What if I'm not dead? I'm waiting to be born, reborn, and I just love that. I love that because we're so focused. Well, and it takes us back to Jesus, in the tomb, thinking about the tomb, and how we think about like Good Friday and Holy Saturday and Easter. And it sort of puts a different spin then on what that all means, and the rolling the stone away, and that whole myth that we have, or story that we have. Um, just puts a whole different, now I'm just thinking, I'm talking off the top of my head because I'm thinking the wheels are spinning in there about, boy, this just kind of opens up. Instead of having Easter as just, or even Good Friday, instead of having Good Friday as just this terrible, sad, somber. And I remember when I was a kid, when I was in confirmation class and we had Good Friday service, and at the end of the service and at the bottom of the bulletin, it said, when you leave here, do not speak to anyone, because remember that Jesus was betrayed by a friend. Well, I took this totally serious, right? Because I'm a kid, teenager. And I go home and I'm up in my room and I'm being very serious. And my mom comes and goes, oh, Kathy's on the phone, my best friend, Kathy, right? We talked every day on the phone, at least 10 times a day, right? It was before texting, so we had to do telephones down in the kitchen. I said, no, I can't talk to her. And she said, well, why not? And I didn't want to tell my mom that, I mean, I guess there was something in me that thought this is crazy. But it's like, no, I can't talk to her. I can't talk to her. And I finally had to tell her because Jesus was betrayed by a friend, you know? But we don't have to think like that. We don't have to think like that anymore. That whether it happened exactly the way that it says that it happened, I mean, it really doesn't matter because Jesus died, and this happened. But instead of thinking about it, it was this one event in history, and that was it. That happened. And then one event in history, resurrection, that happened. And then after that, it's like, well, we just kind of remember all that. Oh, that was bad and that was nice. But no, this is something that happens over and over and over again, this birthing process, especially when we're going through a difficult time or a change in our lives. And I mean, who hasn't been going through changes in their lives these days, right? Every new thing, every new transition, every new challenge that to we have to go. This is the message of the cross, right? This is what's so brilliant about this, and we've lost a lot of it because we've put it all onto this just one day, this one man in this one day. And instead it's like, no matter what difficult situation we're in, you got to go through this, right? You can't go around it. You can't get born by going around the womb. Right? You got to go through that darkness, and then there's the light, and you come out, and you can breathe again, and there's been transformation. So that's what it's all about.
Yeah,
It's not.
I love that idea of the metaphor, but I also love that it's a physical space you can go to. Like
Yeah.
I love pilgrimage, and folk used to go to these womb tombs. There were several of them, by the way, some in the Muslim faith, some in the Jewish faith, some in the
Mm,
Christian faith. Most of the Abrahamic religions have
mm,
some sort of version of this womb tomb, primarily for only for male mystics, but
mm,
mostly for women,
mm,
to have kind of this type of religious shrine, where their body is or their remains are. And so I love this idea. Lots of people would visit them for kind of the regular reason of like seeking fertility in their own life, but
mm,
also it was a place people could go when they were going to start over in their life,
mm,
when they wanted to, like Yom Kippur, they wanted to die to something in the past or confess to something in the past and start over with a new year with
yeah.
like a clean slate. And so I love that there are places in the world where if you've utterly screwed everything up, right? Or in the anonymous groups, it's like what you do after you go back and you make amends with everyone. You get to start
Mm,
over, right?
mm,
And so the idea that there are pilgrimage locations you can go to, walk through this tiny entrance, crawl through like a toddler, emerge on the other side with your new intentions, go up the
mm,
stairs into the brightness of the world and say, okay, now I'm going to start again. I'm going to try again. And there is a vow that I've always loved that I learned from the Franciscan Sisters of Little Falls, Minnesota. And it goes like this: though I've broken my vows 1,000 times, though I've broken my vows 1,000 times, though I've broken my vows 1,000 times. And there's no like pledge to be better or do better, because there's always this knowing you're gonna break your vows, you're gonna break your intentions, but the courage is the like trying again. And I feel like spaces like this tomb for the Virgin Mary is a way to name that we need rituals to start
mhm.
again in the world.
Right. Yep. I think so too. I think that's when are we going to make one of these? When are you going to create? I mean, I think that's great. It's sort of in a smaller sense, like walking a labyrinth. It's doing this physical thing that your body is actually moving, and your brain is kind of processing while you're doing it. It's a very spiritual thing. It just is, and we've lost so much of that. We have people come to church and just sit their butts down in a pew, and you better sit still for an hour. And when I go like this, I'm raising my arms. You stand up. When I go like this, you sit down. And it's just, wow, wouldn't it be so much better to have everybody crawling through a womb tomb?
Well, and
I think
it's
it's great.
and it reminds me a little of like when my kids want to build a fort. But
Yeah.
I think it really is more like
Mhm.
is like my kids have just they were given a clarinet from their school, right? And so if I said to you, my kids are now learning the clarinet, do you want to come to their recital? You would assume they're terrible, right? And that you're going to be there to like root them on so they get to the next stage of practicing, not
Sure.
because the next second recital is going to be perfect, but because we kind of expect that when people are doing hard things or new things, that there are stages to that process. But if I came to you and I said, here's this human adult, Susan, and they're learning the bass ukulele, and they're going to do a performance. You might,
No.
right? The amount of criticism or feedback we have for an
Yeah.
adult that is going to perform in it. Like, you got to be good before you perform it if you're an adult, right? And
Right.
we don't have that same process of allowing people to learn new things in our faith communities, right?
And that it's okay. And it's okay to be going through this hard thing. It's okay that this is how it works. This is the process. And by doing it in a physical way, it just, I mean, we can stand up and talk about this all we want, but by physically doing it, right? Much more visceral to get it, to really get it.
Well, and on days when the words get in the way,
Yeah.
because like think of how many thousands upon thousands of pilgrims go to that place, speaking all the different languages of the world, walk through that space, and whether or not they know it's designed after a womb or they don't, they walk through, and maybe they're just there because the line to get into Gethsemane was too long that day, right? And they needed a place out of the sun for a second. But name another ritual that people can do, have an experience of something important, something sacred just happened. But sometimes when the words get in the way, you can be like, yeah, and then I had to crawl. And even just in the video, you could see there were hundreds upon hundreds of prayers that people had slid. There's a tiny little slit in the glass because they want people to stop putting the prayers in there because it's a lot, right? What do you do with them all? And so like just all of the people putting their prayers and good intentions and their desires into that one space, and all speaking in this world of language dividing and politics splitting us and the differences between our cultures and wars in various places. And it's at least a space where a really large group of people can agree, right? The Catholics and the Baptists can all go through the same thing and in that moment be participating in the same faith ritual.
Yeah, it's pretty, just as I'm thinking about this and how great it would be to be able to offer people that kind of experience, just even if they don't, right? Even if they don't kind of get the rationale and the, all the details and everything down, but it really doesn't matter that you do the experience, and whatever is gonna, it's a mystical thing, right? Whatever is gonna happen in that liminal space, right? It's gonna happen, and you may come out of there with some kind of transformation that you didn't even expect, because it's not just about us, right?
Well, you've been a pastor for a while.
Yeah.
and is it safe to say you're female?
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
Have there been moments in your career where people have felt like you were limited in what you could do or what you should do because of your femaleness?
Sure.
And is there a moment, can you think of a moment like in your personal life where if someone would have said, well, the early church used to design their sacred communities to look like vaginas. I said it, right? This early community used to think women were so sacred that you need to journey in, like that church spaces needed to replicate them.
Yeah.
And the sacredness of what was possible in their bodies, whether or not anyone ever does that.
Yeah.
Right? And that you can birth into the world words. Maybe you'll birth a child. Maybe you'll birth plants. Maybe you'll birth, right? Maybe the things you grow and develop in the world might be different than what that idea of womanhood was. I'm gonna guess in the year you were ordained, the idea of womanhood is different than, right? And so, like, what if there was a class where instead of telling you what the Bible says, they took you to this womb tomb and they just said, this is designed to reflect the sacredness and the sacred possibilities of women.
I would
who
have thought
encounter this
I'm not in
space.
a Lutheran seminary anymore. Number one, probably not even in Christianity anymore. I'm, I mean, in 82 through 87, when I was in Lutheran seminary, feminist theology was just beginning to come. I mean, it was around, but finally filtering its way into Lutheran seminary, but it really was not accepted. It was, looked down upon. And anybody who dared, any women who dared to talk about inclusive language, we were bitches, right? And that's the kind of that's just the way it was. And we were expected to act like men, talk like men, be like men, dress like men, think like men, lead like men. And frankly, I didn't know any better at that time. I didn't know. This is, I was ordained in 80. Well, I graduated in 87, ordained in 89. So I'm not first wave, but even by then, um, it was not this. That's just the way it was. You be this. It wasn't even don't be a woman, be a man. It was just the way it was. This is how you dress. They didn't even have clergy shirts with darts in yet. So we didn't know any better. And always having to fight to get into the hospitals and everything, even with collar on. Hey, miss, where are you going? It's like, anyway, but so I didn't know any better. And so even I think if you had approached me at that time with an idea about doing something like this, I would have looked at you like you were nuts. Like, oh my God, no. What are you? Because I'm kind of crazy. I don't even know what I would have called you. That's just way too. We didn't say woo woo back then, but our version of that is just way too woo woo for me. No. I tell you, when it first started, maybe getting through to me, and I don't know what year that was. Maybe it was in the '90s, sometime when that re-imaging conference happened. I'm not sure even where it was, right? And it was just when I read about it, I thought, oh, well, okay, women coming together and really thinking about images for God. And I guess I was beginning to question things by then too. But oh my God, the backlash against that, and even women colleagues were so up in arms about how dare they think about God in these different ways and imaging God as female. And I think that was sort of my partly awakening of what is your problem. It's like, yeah. And then sort of going on this then journey from then until forever of really discovering these kinds of these. Well, and I think too, back then women's bodies were not respected. It wasn't like it is today, where you could not there was no Me Too movement. I remember getting slapped on the butt in seminary by a male colleague. That's just what happened.
I got slapped in the butt by one of the members of my board of directors at the first place I worked after, as a pastor.
Yeah, that's just the way it was. And of course, that's nothing compared to what some people have gone through. But so, and women, we ourselves were so taught, at least I was in my growing up, women's bodies were not as good as men's bodies. So undoing all of that sort of patriarchal crap took a long time. It's an ongoing process. So anyway, this whole thing about womb, and I don't have children, so it's not like I have this experience of birthing children, but it makes a lot of sense. It just makes so much sense to me. I don't have children, but I was born. So just thinking about having gone through this experience, it's a human experience. This makes perfect sense.
Well, the complicated thing about liberation is that one person's liberation might be another person's stumbling block. Mm-hmm. And so we end our conversation here for today, and we'll have more in the future. So let us know. What do you think? Would visiting a womb tomb be something that helps liberate your faith or liberates your mind in a way that is helpful? Is womb imagery something that is unhelpful, and why? Participate in the conversation. And if you have subjects you'd like us to tackle, let us know. Take care, everybody.
Bye.